What's up, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast, episode numero uno, nuevo, trio, 193. Hopefully that made some kind of sense. I don't know what language that was, but anyway, welcome to the show on this bitterly butt-cold January day. Today, we're going to hear some echoes from New Orleans. That's right. Various bits and pieces of disenchanted voices giving us stories from New Orleans. First up, we have a letter sent to Jeremy Gunn, counsel for the ARRB, received November of 1996. Apparently, someone, I guess Jeremy Gunn, reached out to this individual on October 24th, 1996. And the letter states as thus, and starts off that way. Thank you for your letter of October 24th, 96. Documents to support my statements of my relationships to Lee and to the Banister organization have long since been destroyed, unless there is something in the Banister files confiscated in June of 64. Now, for those of you out there who don't know, the AARB were a significant portion of what they were doing, as well as declassifying documents, from the CIA, the FBI, etc., etc. They were on a document hunt from just about any person connected to the Kennedy assassination, either verified or unverified, tangentially, anything. They were hunting documents, and they reached out to a ton of people. And this is one of the answers that they received. No one has offered to give me a lie detector test, even though I have been agreeable to that since 1990. I have been with Oliver Stone for quite some time, and in meeting me and in investigating me, he found me credible and did not require the lie detector test. Now, of course, Oliver Stone is back in the news recently, not just for his movie from 1991 entitled JFK, but also his recently done documentary, JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass. And I wouldn't go so far as to call Oliver Stone an expert on the assassination, or think that whatever he believes is some kind of litmus test to your veracity. But I digress. Continuing, there are some things about my life that added up to him. These are: Marina acknowledged to him that she met me in the summer of 63 in front of the Crescent City garage. The documentation of FBI agents Reed Jensen and Ray Rockhold, who was at the Crescent City garage on November the 23rd, 1963, giving my description. You would think that if it was someone else, they would have come forward by now. The fact that I disappeared from my home in April of 1962 and never reappeared until July 1972, and that from 64 to 72 I lived under the alias of Kenneth Mason in Del Rio, Texas. These are all provable facts. I lived under the name of Ron Larson the summer of 63, and until the beginning of the summer of 64, when it became evident to me that I had to change my name again and take up residence in an out-of-the-way place. I chose Del Rio. One thing that could be documented was that I had a phone installed in New Orleans at 1923 Iberville Street. The name I used had to be Ron Larson, but there is a possibility it was Kenneth Mason, because I had a social security card under that name. I did not tell Lee I had a phone, as he was into some things that I didn't want to be involved in. I left New Orleans on November the 27th, 1963, still owing a phone bill. When I got to my destination by bus, Harlingen, Texas, I don't know, I phoned my apartment to see if there was an answer. I truly expected the police to be there, but there was no answer, and this was the first time I was able to take a long breath. Maybe, just maybe, I would get through all this. I think I began to come out of a shock at this time, but even so, it added up a bunch of things and went to a gun store where I bought a 9-shot revolver. I remember thinking they would think I only had 6 bullets without reloading. I felt good about having the 3 bullets left. I had an altercation with Banister and Ferry in McAllen, Texas, shortly before Banister's death. It must have been in May. I'm not sure what date, but close to May. I left McAllen and went to Arkansas with a friend named Nathan Bales, ending up in New Orleans again, where I worked at Medrick's Fine Meats on Veterans Highway under the name of Kenneth Mason. Documentation provided. There are no records of Ron Larson under Social Security because I had given them a fake number that I cannot remember. However, I was employed by Viking Packing Company, 346 Calliope Street. Lee had walked to work with me on one occasion, and I was also working part-time for Banister. I always felt Banister sent him to my work to check on me, that I was telling them the truth, that I did work there. I am sending what documents I do have. Certainly, consistency should be considered while considering my credibility. Trying to reconstruct things have taken years of my life, as well as a lot of expenses. I am sending some documents that are related to the subject. I have lost or misplaced some documents. As time passes, some of the famous researchers are beginning to wind down, and this is my opportunity for a lowly, obscure nobody who just happened to be there and covered my tracks by luck and a few quick moves to tell the American people that it was more than just Lee, that there was indeed a conspiratorial plan. I am aware that there are some people who doubt my story. I say to them that if they can come up with documents or proof, that is, that if I was in Louisiana or if I was in LA or New York or somewhere during the summer of 63 instead of New Orleans, they would have grounds for those contentions. But that summer is missing in all of my documented records. When we did the movie, things transpired at a whirlwind pace. When we did the movie, things transpired at a whirlwind pace. I wasn't able to do all of the personal research that I wanted to. There is evidence out there that's just waiting to be exposed or brought to light. This evidence takes money and time to gather, and I don't have much of either. Sincerely, Ron Lewis. Now, you may remember many moons ago, many moons ago, I did a review of Ron Lewis's book. That book was entitled Flashback, The True Story of Lee Harvey Oswald by Ron Lewis. Now, in that book, of course, he made some very interesting claims, such that Oswald was a very chatty Cathy. And he also says that Oswald confessed to him that he took a pot shot at General Walker. And that makes Ron Lewis the second person in history to whom Oswald made that confession, the first being his own wife, Marina Oswald. Oswald allegedly told Lewis that he confessed to former FBI agent Guy Banister that he was the shooter who attacked General Walker's house. And that was a huge mistake. Banister and Walker were good friends. And this parlayed into Oswald being set up as the patsy in the assassination. Excuse me. Now, in this letter to the AARB, Ron Lewis likes to mention Oliver Stone, finding him credible and this, that, and the other. But do you know how Oliver Stone attracted people like Lewis? When Oliver Stone came to Dallas to film his movie about the JFK assassination, he ran a most peculiar advertisement to all readers of the Dallas Morning News. He asked that anyone who had any kind of story, no matter how ridiculous or far-fetched, call a certain phone number. Yes, that is exactly how serious he was, and that is why his movie is filled with implications for exactly 16 agencies to have somehow conspired in the assassination of President Kennedy. So this is how Ron Lewis found Oliver Stone, or Oliver Stone found Lewis. Lewis claimed to hang out with Oswald often in the summer of '63, and that Oswald was somewhat obsessed with political assassinations and even almost attempted to kill Huey Long and then thought better of it. But, the Ron Lewis story is very interesting. Again, no documentation. He could be telling the truth, but, again, it's without proof. It's just a story. So, we're left with that. I just found it interesting that the ARRB reached out to this guy to see if he had any documentation for his story. And of course, he did not. So, moving right along. Our next echo from New Orleans comes from Joseph Oster and his interview for the HSCA done by investigators Burris and Delsa, interviewed on January the 27th, 1978. Joseph Oster was a partner and investigator with Guy Banister when his office was in the Balter building located at 403 Camp Street. Mr. Oster believes that he stayed with the company until sometime in the early 60s. Mr. Oster first met Guy Banister in the New Orleans Police Department in the early 50s, when Mr. Banister headed a group of special investigators to check on corruption within the department's ranks. Mr. Oster was one of the members of this squad. Mr. Banister was fired in '57, and Mr. Oster soon after went into business with him. Mr. Oster stated that he did most of the investigating, and later, date unknown, became dissatisfied because Mr. Banister did not take an interest in the investigations that could have made money for the firm. Mr. Banister had an office on Robert E. Lee Boulevard, but then moved to the Balter building where Mr. Oster joined him. Two of the major contracts that were handled by them were the Coleman Company and the Gulf Oil Company. The contracts involved checking on thefts as well as pre-employment checks for companies such as these. Two sources they used were Fidelifax and the American Security Council. The personnel, these two organizations, the American Security Council and Fidelifax, were headed and staffed mostly by retired FBI agents. The personnel in the office at that time were Carmen Bellino an ex-FBI agent from D.C., he and the chief worked Remington Rand Corporation checks. Quote, the chief was Guy Banister's nickname. It should be noted here, and of course this is an interview written by, or typed up by Garrison Investigation, and it says, it should be noted that Mr. Thomas Beckham states that Lee Harvey Oswald always said that the chief would take care of him. Beckham didn't know if Oswald meant Banister or Hoover, but it's quite clear from Oster that the chief was Guy Banister's nickname. Mr. Oster stated that he has heard Banister call Washington and speak directly to J. Edgar Hoover many times. Mr. Banister used to call and speak to someone in the CIA, but Mr. Oster does not remember any name. John Sullivan, another employee of Mr. Banister's who was also a retired FBI agent from Vicksburg, Virginia. Mr. Sullivan committed suicide shortly after President Kennedy's assassination. Miss Joanne Burton was one of 3 secretaries employed by Mr. Banister. Her husband, George Burton, was busted for a narcotics violation by Mr. Oster during her employment. He should be working for his father, who owns a plumbing company in New Orleans. Mrs. Levert Welsh, who later went to work for Lake Steamship Company. Where have we heard that before? Oh yeah, that was the ship that Oswald hopped on to head to Europe. Her husband might be an employee of the Public Belt Railroad in New Orleans. She was from McNeef, Missouri. FNU, 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 I don't know if that's a name or if that's initials, was related to someone in the J.S. Ferry Wholesale Company in New Orleans. Every morning, the secretaries had to read the newspapers and cut out, index, and file stories of interest. These clippings were mostly political and had to do with communism, integration, defense, etc. Mr. Banister kept files on all un-American activities reported in the papers. Other peoples and people that had business with Mr. Banister were Jack S. Martin and Major Stewart, who wrote and owned the West Bank Herald, located in Algiers, Louisiana. This is New Orleans, but it is located on the west bank of the Mississippi River. This paper was active in Latin American affairs, and Mr. Oster feels that Major Stewart had intelligence ties to Latin America. Jack S. Martin was a part-time reporter and part-time investigator. Mr. Oster described him as very smart and an adventurer, always trying to impress people with the important people that he knew. Mr. Oster remembers catching Mr. Martin with a very young sailor in the Colonia Hotel located on Exchange Alley. Mr. Oster will attempt to find the report made on this case in which Martin was allegedly involved in homosexual acts with this sailor. The NOPD arrest sheets do not reflect any such arrest, but Mr. Oster feels that these sheets might have been tampered with over the years. Mr. Martin denies to the investigators that he was ever involved in any homosexual activities, even though he associated with many young men and known deviants such as David Ferry. I'd say it's probably a safe bet. William Dalzell and Arcasha Smith were in the Balter building and knew Guy Banister. Dalzell would talk for hours with Banister. Dalzell had connections to South America and the Far East. He spoke many languages and was interested in the oil business, likely a CIA operative. Mr. George Singleton and Mr. Banister were close friends. Mr. Singleton wrote for the Citizens Council and was close to Judge Leander Perez in the fight against integration. Colonel Bluford Balter, Mr. Singleton, Mr. Stewart, and others around Banister were interested in ultra-conservative politics in which Mr. Oster did not take any active part in. Mr. Oster stated that he would work for any group that paid him. He didn't get involved personally. Colonel Balter would take out ads in the local papers against integration. Mr. Oster stated that these people were conservative but completely honest. They backed the cleanup of the NOPD. Banister kept the files of the Special Committee to Investigate Crime. These files are now at least partly kept by Mr. Aaron Cohn of the New Orleans Metropolitan Crime Commission. Mr. Oster remembers the files from this one group as about 10 file drawer folders full. Mr. Banister at one time had a visit by an agent of the FBI who told Oster that Mr. Hoover had asked for an honest appraisal of the Bureau from some of its top agents. Mr. Banister is alleged to have sent up a memo from Chicago that called the Bureau a prostitute that wanted to keep her virginity. Because of this statement, this unknown agent stated that Banister was sent to Butte, Montana, as a punishment by J. Edgar Hoover. Here you go, buddy. Head your ass to Butte, Montana, and go check out some UFOs, bud. The reporting investigators received information from an interview with Jack S. Martin that Mr. Banister went to Butte, Montana to handle FBI activities that monitored the information coming over Alaska from Russia. Mr. Martin feels that Mr. Banister was handling information from Russia while Oswald was assigned there to pick up information on the U-2 flights and get information from agents in Russia. When Oswald took Marina out of Russia by marriage, the CIA and the FBI were mad at him for blowing years of work. Jack Martin feels this might be part of why they used him, Oswald, in the assassination setup. When pressed as to the identities of the they, Mr. Martin stated that he didn't know. The investigators have no way of checking the accuracy of the accounts. Mr. Oster quit Banister when he moved from the Balter building to 531 Lafayette Street, which is the side entrance to 544 Camp Street. Mr. Oster still maintained close ties with and a close friendship with Mr. Banister. The people from around the office Oster knew were the following: David Franklin Lewis, a young man that was a close friend of Jack Martin, and likely the bottom. Jack Martin and Joseph Newborough as investigators. William Nietzsche, a retired FBI agent who later went to work at NASA Security at the Michaud Complex in New Orleans for Mason Rust contractors. Hugh Ward, a pilot that knew David Ferry well and whose father worked for one of the major steamship companies in New Orleans. Hugh Ward was the pilot who went down in South America with New Orleans ex-mayor DeLesseps S. Morrison, who held the position of ambassador to the American states from the United Nations. Colonel Eugene Dooling, who had a private security service. Vernon Geddes, partner to Guy Banister. Geddes quit when Nietzsche came to work. Delphine Roberts, who was a close friend to Banister as well as a secretary. Louise Decker, who was a secretary. Mr. Oster did the investigation on David Ferry for Southern Research Incorporated. On November 22nd or 23rd, he accompanied Garrison's men to Ferry's apartment on Louisiana Avenue. He remembers seeing a whip, masks, fake eyebrows and hair, and a priest's robe in Ferry's apartment. Leighton Martins, another likely bottom, was in the apartment when the investigators arrived. The report will be made available to the Select Committee if he can find it. Mr. Oster was asked about the following people and gave the following information. He was asked about Mr. Guy Johnson. He was known to Mr. Oster from the Balter building and also from 531 Lafayette Street. He was an attorney that practiced with Bill Wegman and Sal Penusca of New Orleans. He was very conservative in his politics and was in the Office of Naval Intelligence, maybe in the Naval Reserve when Oster knew him. Oster had seen Guy Johnson coming from the upstairs of the old post office building where the ONI headquarters was in those days. Johnson, also a close friend of Banister's, he has seen many Cubans or Spanish people in both the Balter building and 531 Lafayette Street. These people were dressed well at times, and other times they were in fatigues. David Ferry and Leighton Martins used to wear fatigues a lot. Alvin Cobb was a friend of Guy Banister. Mr. Cobb was a supporter of the KKK, otherwise known as the Ku Klux Klan. His brother managed the International House, which is located on Common Street, just off the corner of Camp Street, where the old International Trade Mart was located. Bill Martin was an investigator with Oster and Banister. He traveled in South America and worked in the law section of the International House on Common Street. He was a graduate of Tulane University, and his father worked with either Standard Fruit or United Fruit. Regis Kennedy was an agent that was seen by Oster around Banister's office, but did not know if they were friends. He was an honest and hardworking agent, according to Oster. So, there's a lot of information. A lot of interconnectedness, a lot of interconnected threads with the International Trade Mart, Guy Banister's office, and associates. So there's that. Next up, we hear from the fat man himself, Joseph Newberry Jr., on April 10th, 1978, interview by Robert Burris. On Monday, April the 10th, 1978, Investigator Burris met with Mr. Newborough and learned that he was a private investigator with Guy Banister and Associates from approximately 1958 through 1964, when Mr. Banister died. Mr. Newborough was familiar with and had access to all the files and investigations in the office except for some cases and files that were handled personally by Mr. Banister. He doesn't have any of those files or cases now and does not know where they might be located. He heard that on the day that Banister died, his wife Mary Banister went into the office. Delphine Roberts and William Nishi also went to the office and might know the whereabouts of some files. Mr. Newborough knew Banister when he was a chief of police for the New Orleans Police Department and was investigating corruption within the New Orleans area. Mayor de Lesseps Shep Morrison hired him, but they later had a falling out and Banister was fired from the department. Mr. Newborough stated that Banister was a very intelligent man and kept an excellent filing system. He was very conservative and belonged to the Masons. Mr. Banister had financial problems in his business and was drinking a little the last few years of his life, but his mind always stayed alert, and he was interested in any activities that he considered subversive or corruptive. He had a large file on police corruption and had one of the last remaining files and indexes on 27,000 known communists in the United States. His Cuban files contained information on Batista men and on Castro men. Banister also kept files on members of the ultra-right, such as the Nazi Party and the KKK. Newborough stated that he heard that Lee Harvey Oswald had rented an office on the second or third floor of the 544 Camp Street building from Sam Newman. The office that Oswald supposedly rented was previously rented by Jimmy Arthus. Jimmy Arthus, now deceased, hated President Kennedy so much he once put a dead pigeon in a shoebox and shipped it to the president with the correct name and return address on it. And every time the president came near New Orleans, the Secret Service or the FBI would sit with Arthus because he was a threat. Mr. Newborough doesn't remember who told him that Oswald rented the upstairs office, and he had never seen Oswald except in the media. He believes that Guy Banister had files on Oswald, but he has never seen them. Mr. Banister was interested in all the Cuban activities in New Orleans. On the day that the Cubans invaded their homeland in 1961, Mr. Newborough was in Thompson's cafeteria in the 100 block of St. Charles Street, and Banister came in and told him about it. Banister very seldom went into that cafeteria, and Banister made the remark that the attack took him by surprise, but that he should have figured it out because All the people involved locally had disappeared. Mr. Newborough did not know who he meant by all the people. Banister did have Cubans coming into the office, but this wasn't an area that Newborough paid much attention to. Once, Newborough took a $1,600 check made out to the business and got it cashed for Banister at one of the nearby banks. Banister could cash corporation checks because of an agreement that he had with the banks. When Newborough took the money back to the office, he asked for the $120 that the business owed him, and Banister said that the money wasn't his, that he was just passing it on to where it was needed, or words to that effect. Newborough does not know where this money went, but he believes that Banister was involved in many things that he did not know about. When Banister gave him a look or indicated that something was private, he would not interfere, and he feels because of this he was a trusted and reliable employee. So yes, Newborough minded his own business and kept his mouth shut. On November the 22nd, 1963, Joe Newborough and Guy Banister were in the uptown area of New Orleans installing a bug for a client. After they finished, they stopped by an uptown printer that Banister knew, and the printer told them about the president being shot. The printer was glad, but Banister did not show any emotion at all. They returned to the office, and Delphine Roberts and Jack Martin were there. Later that same day, Banister asked Newborough to go and check on Jack Martin, who was in the Cats and Jammer bar on Camp Street in the 500 block. Jack Martin went back to Banister's office, and they had an argument. Banister hit Martin with his pistol, but not very seriously. Later, Banister gave Martin cab fare to go home. Jack Martin later said that the argument was over phone calls, but Newborough believes it was over something more serious than that. Newborough still wonders to this day how Jack Martin knew that David Ferry was in Texas on the day of the assassination. David Ferry and Jack Martin had not been talking to each other for months because of an argument that they had over some archbishop and some religion that they were investigating or either trying to get into. Jack Martin had Ferry ordained by someone laying hands on him, but he, Martin, got some phony papers of ordination for Newborough through the mail. Mr. Newborough is willing to talk to the investigators more, but states that he would not talk to the select committee without being represented by an attorney. When asked why, he stated he just thinks he has to protect his rights. Further interviews will be made and reported. End of memo. Robert Burris. So there is a pretty big echo from New Orleans. Telephone Contact with Dave Clark. No relation to me. The FBI. December 15, 1977. From Betsy Palmer, HSCA investigator. On this date, I reviewed the FBI files on Guy Banister, former FBI agent, former assistant police chief in New Orleans, and former private investigator. Only 2 volumes of information were available on Banister, and within those 2 volumes, the only item of interest was an 8-page report marked secret. FBI file number 105-87912-182, compiled by Special Agent Ernest Wall Jr. and Special Agent Warren C. DeBreeze in New Orleans in late 1960, early 1961. Information was given on 2 Cuban groups in which Sergio Arcacha Smith, Guy Banister, and William Dalzell were interested in or members of. A detailed memo in this portion of the Banister files is forthcoming. Interesting. All right. Next up, we have a memo to Jeremy Gunn of the ARRB from Laura Dank of the ARRB, dated April 27th, 1995. And this is regarding New Orleans' list of potential witnesses for a June public hearing. And it goes over several players from New Orleans. And I'm not gonna go through all of them, but just some of the more interesting ones. I think it's interesting that Tom Bethel, okay, he's always claimed to be part of the Garrison investigation, kept a diary of the time, and was very critical of the Garrison investigation, supposedly. It says here, Tom Bethel claims he participated in the Garrison investigation. He is not mentioned in On the Trail of the Assassins. Author of December 1691 article in the National Review in which he criticized Garrison, discussed the role of Bill Boxley / William Wood, wrote a manuscript in approximately 1971 about the Shaw case, was never published. Pershing Gervais, chief investigator, served with Garrison in the Army during World War II, a police officer in the New Orleans Police Department, allegedly wanted Garrison to stop the Kennedy assassination investigation. Had a personality conflict with Frank Klein, and Garrison fired Klein when Klein refused to work with Gervais. Later, Garrison fired Gervais after he learned that Gervais was accepting bribes in exchange for getting cases dismissed. In 1988, Pershing Gervais was working as a bail bondsman in Baton Rouge. Lou Ivon, a young police investigator involved in the Garrison investigation throughout, in 1988, was a known member of the Louisiana State Legislature. James Alcock, assistant DA and chief prosecutor in the Shaw trial. Garrison describes Alcock as always unhappy with uncertainty. Advised against calling David Ferry before the grand jury. Did not think they had enough evidence. Decided to call Charles Spezial to testify. In 1988, was practicing law in Yuma, Louisiana after being a criminal district court judge in New Orleans. Moo Andrew Chiambra, assistant DA, member of Garrison's investigative group. Extremely familiar with the French Quarter in New Orleans, wink wink. Knew many of the owners and employers of the French Quarter establishments. Interviewed 300 townspeople in Clinton, Louisiana. Interviewed Perry Rousseau for several hours. In 1988, he was a magistrate in the Criminal District Court in New Orleans. William Wood, Bill Boxley, investigator, told Garrison he was a former CIA case officer, a newspaper journalist and investigator from Austin, Texas. Garrison claims they used the name Boxley in order to obscure his CIA connection from the media. Garrison believes that Boxley was working for the federal government and was trying to sabotage the investigation. Boxley resigned as an investigator before the beginning of the Shaw trial. Number 2, Cosa Nostra in New Orleans. Emile Bruno, alleged member of Carlos Marcello's New Orleans Syndicate, who paid Oswald's bail after the August 1963 arrest for disturbing the peace. Emile Bruno. Let's see. Samuel Saya, organized crime leader from New Orleans who was a business partner of Dutz Moret. Harold Tannenbaum, nightclub owner in New Orleans and friend and business associate of Jack Ruby. Lived in a trailer park in which one of Marcello's lieutenants also lived. Frank Timpany, one of 3 top bookmakers in the country, operated out of New Orleans. Section 3, FBI Field Office. Warren DeBreeze, FBI Special Agent in New Orleans, author of the 10-25-63 report on Oswald, perhaps liaison to Anti-Castro Groups, perhaps. Denies meeting Oswald. Won't comment about relationship with Arrest Pena. Pena claims he worked for DeBreeze and the FBI. Milton Cock. FBI Special Agent in New Orleans, author of the 103163 report on LHO. John Quigley, FBI Special Agent in New Orleans, had a lengthy private interview on August 10th, 63 with Oswald after his arrest in New Orleans for disturbing the peace. Quigley destroyed notes from an interview with Oswald. William Walter, an FBI employee of the New Orleans office, reported that Lee Harvey Oswald had an internal security file and an informant file. Saw FBI telex from January 1763 and said it then disappeared from New Orleans field office. Told Mark Lane about the telex. May still be in New Orleans. Section 4. Right-wing militant groups. Let's see. Rudolph Davis, a.k.a. Richard Rudolph Davis, Cuban exile living in New Orleans, who operated a training camp for an anti-Castro military force in the Louisiana swamp during the early 60s, an investigator for Attorney Dean Andrews. Carlos Quiroga, anti-Castro Cuban exile in New Orleans, friend of Carlos Bernier. Private investigator David Lewis allegedly saw Quiroga with David Ferry and a, quote, Leon Oswald. William Dalzell, international businessman of mystery, involved in New Orleans anti-Castro activities with Banister and allegedly the CIA. Carlos Bernier, anti-Castro Cuban exile, head of the New Orleans branch of the DRE, salesman at Casa Roca, a retail clothing store. In Cuba, was an attorney and an assistant secretary for the criminal court. Did not become a member of the Bar of the United States. Met Oswald in August of 63 in New Orleans. Oswald offered to help with methods for Bernier's organization. Several days later, Bernier saw Oswald handing out pro-Castro leaflets and engaged Oswald in a scuffle. He also debated Oswald on the radio. Sergio Arcacha Smith, head of the CRC, Cuban Revolutionary Council, office at 544 Camp Street, 15 months before LHO used the address. Anti-Castro Cuban exile with ties to Marcelo and Banister. Rose Chermy implicated him in the assassination. Miss Chermy died on September 4th, 65 after being thrown from a car. George Wilcox told Kurtz he saw Oswald, Ferry, and Cubans conducting paramilitary maneuvers north of Lake Pontchartrain. Witnesses: Adrian Alba, owner of the Crescent City Garage next to William Riley Coffee Company, knew Oswald, talked to Oswald about guns, asserts that he helped LHO repair the sling on a Mannlicher Carcano rifle. Told Anthony Summers that in the summer of 63, a man with FBI credentials requested a car, a green Studebaker. The next day, the same car stopped in front of the coffee company, and Oswald bent down, talked to the driver, took a large envelope from a man inside. Several days later, Oswald met the same car outside of the coffee company, and on the morning of November the 22nd, 63, when Alba was out, one of Alba's employees said that a man claiming to be Alba's friend came in and asked to look at Alba's gun magazines. Dean Andrews, a New Orleans lawyer with links to Marcelo, told the Warren Commission that Oswald requested his legal help in appealing his discharge from the Marine Corps. On the day of the assassination, Andrews was in the hospital with pneumonia. The Hotel Dieu told the Warren Commission that Clay Bertrand called and asked him to go to Dallas and defend Oswald. Said Bertrand often called him on behalf of the gay kids. Andrews' office was rifled after he got out of the hospital. Emmett Charles Barb, maintenance foreman and Oswald's supervisor at William Riley Coffee in 1963, told the Warren Commission that Oswald started on May the 10th as a greaser and oiler. And on July 1963, Oswald stopped working at the coffee company. He noticed that Oswald was often absent from his workplace because he was next door at the Crescent City Garage, not in the closet with Judy Baker. told the Warren Commission he ultimately recommended that LHO be terminated for failure to complete his work. Vance Blaylock, 16 years old in 1964, claims he saw Carlos Bernier and Oswald together at Casa Roca, went downtown with his friend Philip Garachi, who was collecting money for the Cuban Student Revolutionary Council, testified that Oswald came in and began talking to Bernier about methods and asking Bernier about the workings of Bernier's organization. He did not ask to join. Oswald explained that he had been a Marine and that he lived on Magazine Street. Blaylock did not recall a discussion about President Kennedy. Blaylock told the Warren Commission that Oswald seemed like an intelligent, well-spoken, well-dressed, and well-groomed human being. The FBI interviewed Blaylock in December of 1963. Vernon Bundy testified at Clay Shaw's trial, claims he saw Shaw give Oswald a roll of money in July of 63, an admitted heroin addict, may still be in New Orleans. Oscar DeSlat, Bolton Ford dealership employee, told Garrison staff about two men who came in claiming to be members of Friends of Democratic Cuba. William George Gadet, CIA employee for 20 years, obtained a tourist card to Mexico City at the same time as Oswald. Tourist card had next serial number after Oswald. First admitted, then denied knowing Oswald. Says he never went to Mexico City and cannot remember why he obtained the card. If alive, he may still be in New Orleans at 850 Martin Berman Avenue. Louis Hopkins, a New Orleans travel agent who booked Oswald's trip from New Orleans to Le Havre, France, aboard the SS Marion Likes, told the Warren Commission that Oswald was not well versed in European travel. Travel agent's office located at 124 Camp Street in the International Trade Mart. You can't make this shit up, folks. You know, I just keep, in my mind, I see New Orleans as this huge city. But in reality, it sounds like, you know, all this shit was within like 4 blocks of each other. That this town was so small and everybody knew each other and everybody went to the same places, and it's just mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Michael Kurtz, professor of history and government at Southeastern Louisiana University in Hammond, Louisiana, teaches a course on the Kennedy assassination and author of Crime of the Century and articles in Louisiana history about Oswald in New Orleans and about organized crime in Louisiana. Also, claims to have seen Oswald with Guy Banister in New Orleans twice during the summer of 63. Francis Martello, New Orleans police lieutenant, when Oswald was arrested during the summer of 63, he told Martello that he did not speak English when around Marina in June because he did not want them to be Americanized. Dr. Frank Minyard, New Orleans coroner at the time of Clay Shaw's death, wanted to obtain a court order for the exhumation of Shaw's body in order to verify the nature of Shaw's death. After public outcry, Minyard reconsidered and never exhumed the body. The Miret family. Lillian and Charles Dutz Miret were Oswald's aunt and uncle in New Orleans. Oswald stayed with them for a while in New Orleans, and some theorists say that Dutz Miret had connections to the Marcello crime family. Frederick O'Sullivan knew Oswald in junior high school in New Orleans and recruited Oswald into the Civil Air Patrol. Delphine Roberts, Guy Banister's secretary at 544 Camp Street, at first hesitant to discuss what she saw, but later confirmed that Oswald and Ferry were frequent visitors to Banister's office. Says Banister was aware that Oswald was distributing pro-Castro literature on the streets, and, well, let's just say he was aware of it. Harry Russo, acquaintance of David Ferry, reportedly witnessed Ferry, Shaw, and a, quote, Leon Oswald meeting to discuss why to kill JFK. Recalled Ferry describing a triangulation of Crossfire, the quote-unquote star witness in Garrison trial. In 1988, was operating a property rental business in New Orleans, drove a taxi cab on the side. May still be in New Orleans at 741 Navarro Avenue. Fred Sewall, a salesman at Bolton Ford dealership in New Orleans, reported that on January the 20th, 61, two men, one Cuban named Moore and Oswald, ordered 10 trucks for Friends of Democratic Cuba. However, Oswald was in the USSR at the time. Yeah, that's a problem. So, the ARRB had a priority list. A. John Judge suggested we talk to Malcolm Monroe, Stephen Lehman, Monty Lehman, Stephen Plotkin, Eddie Saper, Frank Klein, attorneys for CIA in New Orleans, allegedly represented Alvin Boboff, Gordon Novell, and Oster in Louisiana. Wallace Milam thinks there's a connection between Riley Coffee Company and the NASA facility in Michaud, Louisiana, outside New Orleans. Lists names of individuals who worked at both places. See Milam's letter and other relevant individuals. Jerry Shinley wants us to pursue info on the American Nazi Party in New Orleans, especially any records regarding Robert Surrey and the Dallas ANP. Any records relating to the 463 swastika incident in Dallas. Swastikas painted on approximately 1 dozen downtown Dallas stores. Any records relating to New Orleans ANP, George Lincoln Rockwell, Colonel Bluford Balter, and Ray Lehart. Any privately held papers, REANP activities in Dallas or New Orleans. Internal memo to Ann Buttimer in the ARRB from Joseph Freeman, ARRB, August 30th, 95. A Deputy Leonard Spears of the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office thought he recognized one of Oswald's leaflet distributing companions on WDSU TV's film clip when the clip was rerun after the assassination. He identified Oswald's companion as a James Farlow Mccurley. Some paperwork on this found its way into State Louisiana's official report on the assassination, which was assigned a CD Commission document number and eventually became CE 1413. The pages of the CD relevant to Mccurley were excised, however, and not published by the Warren Commission as part of CE 1413. I presume because of privacy concerns. The point of telling you all this is, of course, is to bring your attention another local entity, the Sheriff's Office of East Baton Rouge Parish, which may not be on your radar screen. FYI, there is some paperwork in Warren Commission files from the Department of Justice, State of California, Bureau of Criminal Investigation and Identification, RE the Minutemen. Since it's already in the Warren Commission files, we're all set, but I thought you want to know of yet another agency represented in the JFK collection. Now, here's the document on James Farlow Mccurley, dated December 10th, 1963, that never did make its way into the Warren Commission documents. One of the individuals passing out pamphlets was recognized by Spears. This man was James Farlow Mccurley, formerly of 1536 North 23rd Street, Baton Rouge. Mccurley is suspected of, you guessed it, homosexual and activities. He uses the name Madeir. Excuse me, Madeir. Mccurley was arrested by the Sheriff's Office and City Police Department on March 16, 1963, in the raid on the Black Lamp Lounge at 1628 Main Street. Mccurley has several arrests by the Baton Rouge and Beaumont, Texas Police Departments. Most of these are for disorderly conduct although one charge is for attempted rape. Spears stated that in viewing the film strip, Mccurley was actually shown passing out the leaflets, and when he ran out of these leaflets, he walked over to Oswald and received a new supply. Mccurley has previously been employed as a cook for the Tuttle houses in both Baton Rouge and New Orleans. His date of birth is 11/24/37. He is a white male, 6'2½", 175, brown hair and blue eyes. His FBI number is 299-397D. The last arrest known to Louisiana authorities was March 22, 1963, when he was arrested with his brother, Dick Mccurley, on a charge of disorderly conduct. Dick Mccurley is also a suspected homosexual. Records of the Baton Rouge Police Department reflect that Dick Mccurley was born in February 2036. He's a white male, 6'1", 173, brown hair and hazel eyes. His last known address is 1536 North 23rd Street, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Dick Mccurley has also been employed as a cook by the Tuttle houses in the Baton Rouge area. Because of the identification of James Mccurley by Deputy Spears and others, this information has been passed to Captain Pat Ganaway, commander of the Special Services Bureau of the Dallas Police Department. A copy is also being forwarded to Colonel Thomas D. Burbank of the Louisiana State Police for filing with the Subversive Activities Unit. George L. Risley, investigator. It is noted the arrest of David W. Ferry, Roland Boboff, and a white male by the name of Martins. Ferry was the subject of an extensive background investigation by the writer during the latter part of '62. This inquiry was for Eastern Airlines, who had formerly employed Ferry as one of their pilots. During this investigation, considerable information was developed which showed Ferry had definite homosexual tendencies. In addition, Ferry, Boboff, and Martins were at one time believed active in the anti-Castro movement in New Orleans, generally referred to as a Cuban counter-revolutionary movement. The full report on Ferry, his associates, and activities is presently in New Orleans at the Southern Research Company offices in the Maritime Building. The person who conducted the investigation subsequent to the writers leaving SRC is Ronald Hubner. Sincerely, George L. Risley. Interesting. Carlos Quiroga is a Cuban refugee and a militant anti-Castro partisan. He appears to have been known Banister and told a Washington Star staff writer that Ferry had been a frequent visitor at Banister's offices. He is confidential informant number NOT5, who gave information concerning Oswald. He had gone to Oswald's home on Magazine Street on a pretext of interest in joining the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and obtained some literature after a lengthy discussion with Oswald. He turned the literature over to Carlos Bernier, who was also carefully following Oswald's activities. Quiroga offered his services to the New Orleans District Attorney staff as a kind of undercover agent in the FPCC, but was rejected. Ernesto Rodriguez Sr. told interviewing Secret Service agents on December 1st, '63, that Quiroga had been closely associated with Sergio Arcacha Smith in the CRC before Smith left the group. Quiroga was served with a subpoena on May 8th and presumably appeared before the New Orleans grand jury on Wednesday, May 10th. Garrison plans to indict Quiroga for perjury. Garrison plans to show Quiroga's connection with the Davis training camp on Lake Pontchartrain. Davis, who claims to be willing to do anything for money, will testify that one Bertrand was in attendance at the camp. That would be Richard Ricardo Davis. 4. One Alberto Fowler, a Garrison investigator, told Quiroga that Garrison intends to prove that it was Novell, not Oswald, who killed the president. Okay. Gordon Novell, huh? Right, gotcha. So, February 20th, 1967. FBI Memorandum to the Special Agent in charge of New Orleans from Special Agent Robert Hybel. No relation to Alec Hydell. It's just basically... All right, it states that he was acquainted with Carlos Bernier, was aware of the arrest of Bernier and two other Cubans on August the 9th when Oswald passed out Fair Play for Cuba handbills on Canal Street. Approximately a week later, he was seated in Thompson's restaurant when the representative of Puerto Rico, who has his office in the International Trade Mart, showed him a Fair Play for Cuba handbill, telling him these handbills were being passed out in front of the International Trade Mart. Quiroga notified the police, but the police arrived too late, and the persons passing out the handbills had gone. Then he tells about talking to Oswald about joining the FPCC. Quiroga, on conclusion of his talk with Oswald, informed Lieutenant Francis Martello, 1st District NOPD, regarding his contact with Oswald and told him he'd be willing to fill out an application and report any information, but he was turned down. Quiroga indicated that he had no further contact with Oswald from that point. Quiroga was described as a white male, born 1/27/36 in Havana, Cuba, 5'9", 144, slender build, black hair, brown eyes, and medium complexion. Nothing really too new in this. This is basically an FBI memorandum, a view file summary on everything Carlos Quiroga. Here's one. On January 23rd, 1966, Quiroga telephonically contacted Special Agent Warren DeBreeze at his home and advised that Quiroga's wife, had received a call from an unknown man who stated that Quiroga was no good and that he was working with the Office of the District Attorney of the City of New Orleans relative to an investigation of the death of President Kennedy, and if he didn't stop bothering the, quote, opposition, he would be killed. Quiroga further stated that he had called the NOPD and that they were at his home. He was advised that the FBI could furnish no protection to he or his wife, and that this was the responsibility of the local authorities. So, how does Carlos Quiroga have Warren DeBreeze's home telephone number? Okay. And here is a November 23rd, 1964 letter by courier from the United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, to the Honorable J. Lee Rankin, General Counsel of the President's Commission. Dear Mr. Rankin, reference is made to your letter of November the 10th, 64, and the enclosure thereto consisting of a copy of a letter to the President of the United States from Carlos Quiroga, 3134 Derby Place, New Orleans, Louisiana, and his letter to the President. So we got Carlos Quiroga writing Lyndon Johnson. Okay. Quiroga stated that that he had been interviewed by both the FBI and United States Secret Service, but had not been called upon by the Warren Commission to give his direct and full testimony. For your information, Quiroga was interviewed by this bureau on November 27, 1963, concerning his knowledge of Lee Harvey Oswald. Results of our interview with Quiroga were furnished to the President's Commission in the report of Special Agent Warren DeBreeze, dated December 2nd, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, in the matter entitled Lee Harvey Oswald, IS, Russia, Cuba, page 705 and 706. Mr. Quiroga's identity was not set out in the report of Special Agent Debris, but instead Mr. Quiroga was referred to as confidential informant NOT5. For your added information, Mr. Quiroga's identity was not revealed in Debris' report because of his specific request that his identity not be revealed. He made this request because his father was at the time in prison in Cuba and his mother was residing in Cuba. Sincerely yours, J. Edgar Hoover, the man himself. Subject: Victor M. Pankey. December 1st, 1967. Allegation: Carlos Quiroga, Cuban member of FRD in New Orleans, told Garrison in a taped interview that Victor Manuel Pankey Y. Batista was in charge of training Cubans at Lacombe, Louisiana. CIA connection: granted a POA on November 14th, 64 for use by JMATE, which was canceled on 13 October 65. Source: taped interrogation of Quiroga by Garrison on 21 January 67. Interview of Bernier by FBI on 18 July 67, who reported on Quiroga's contact with Garrison. OS indices results. Subject security file contains FBI reports on internal security investigations on subject in 1960. Allegations that he was a plant by Castro and anti-Castro groups in the U.S. were explored. Subject's file reflects he was covertly investigated in 1964 in connection with a POA for use by JM8 in Miami and Cuba, and cancellation of this clearance is dated 13 October 65. His file contains no information to indicate connection with the Lacombe, Louisiana area. Pankey is a 49-year-old Cuban who was the chief of rural police under Castro. He came to the U.S. on September 3rd, 1960, after he feared Castro would try to eliminate him because of subject's anti-communist activities. Pankey had fought with Castro against Batista, but lost faith with Castro in June of 1959 when Castro began to show communist sympathies. Man, Quiroga's just ratting everybody out, boy. My goodness. What is this? Sorry, I'm trying to see what the hell this is. Oh, I know what this is. This is more Orestes Pena and Oswald and Warren Debris. Jolly goodness. Pena told CBS TV News in 1975 that he had seen Oswald and Debris together. Debris denied it. Pena uttered an outright lie when he said he saw me with Oswald. This requires strong refutation since it provides a false basis for historical evaluation of various government institutions. When Debris testified before the HSCA, he was less certain. Quote, Oswald was never an asset. We did not use that term at the time. It would have been tantamount to saying he was an informant. He was never an informant. I am disinclined to believe that he was ever recorded as a source. But that possibility exists because a source of information can be almost anybody. I would reiterate that he was not the type of person that would initiate information flowing to us. He would be somebody who would be in the area, somebody else who could tell us about what went on in the bar. We may have talked to him. This is from Warren Debris' HCA testimony in May 3rd, 1978, folks. Oswald's notebook provided evidence Debris was in contact with him. The name Warren Debris, cleverly disguised as two Russian words. Warren Debris' name was in Oswald's notebook. Debris was sent a copy of this entry of Oswald's notebook in July of 1993. He stated, I find it interesting, but I think obviously he put my name in his notebook because I had investigated him prior to the assassination. But how the hell would he know that? Okay. I talked to the landlord, I guess, I assume. I have no idea. There was a multitude of ways he could have gotten my name. I talked to his landlady on Magazine Street. The idea was to confirm if he had any employment that placed him in contact with sensitive material as far as national security was concerned. And of course, I gave her my name and showed her my ID. The HSCA questioned Mrs. Jessie Garner, Oswald's landlady at Magazine Street, and she did say that an FBI agent came to her home and questioned her about Oswald. But here's what she said when asked by the HSCA. Do you remember the name of this FBI agent? His name was Milton Cage. That's a far cry from Warren DeBreeze, don't you think? Could it have been Milton Cock? Could have been. It was about a month after Lee moved in. Yeah, Milton is a fairly uncommon name. Cage, Cock, Milton, Cage, Milton, Cock. You know, believable. Damn sure wasn't Warren DeBreeze, that's for sure. Mrs. Garner checked her address book and found she had spelled the word Koch. She also said several Cuban males visited Oswald. DeBreeze asked why Oswald felt it necessary to disguise his name as two Russian words. He responds, I have no idea. I got the impression he fancied himself a spook. I have no idea. I never met him ever, and to my knowledge, I never spoke to him. The HSC called Pena to testify. He reiterated to the committee that he had seen Oswald and DeBreeze together several times. Okay, I have no idea who wrote this document, but at the time of the station, well, it tells about a meeting with David Ferry by somebody. At the sale of the station, Dave introduced me to a young man whose first name was Alvin. Dave was making him his partner. The service station was going to do business as Dave Al, DAV hyphen Al, Daval, and a sign was erected to that fact. Both service stations sold tires, batteries, and accessories. It was a common practice that if a dealer needed an auto part that was not in his stock, he would borrow it from another dealer. On several of my visits to Dave Al's station, I noticed a white sports car there. On one such visit, an employee drove up in the car with food he had picked up for the employees. I questioned using customers' cars to run errands, and I was told that the car belonged to Mr. Clay, Dave's friend, and he wouldn't mind. Another time, I saw Dave talking to a man by the white sports car. They were standing about 50 feet from me. The man was tall, at least a head taller than Dave, with a head of gray hair. I didn't see the man's face clearly, only his profile, and he had very high cheekbones. I was told that man was Mr. Clay, owner of the car. And in 1967, when I saw pictures of Clay Shaw, there was a striking resemblance. I know two people who I think can testify that Dave Ferry and Clay Shaw were friends. My most shocking visit to Dave's station came about when a customer came into my Causeway Boulevard station at about 4 p.m. needing a trailer that I didn't have. So I called Dave, and he had one. I went to Dave's station. Dave wasn't wearing a golf dealer uniform. He was wearing military clothes. We went into the station to complete the transfer papers, and while we were in the office, 4 or 5 Hispanic men came from the rear of the station office wearing Army combat clothes and carrying sidearms. I had seen Hispanics at the station before, however, never with guns. I was so startled, I blurted out, "My God, what are you going to do, start a war?" Dave's reply was, "They're my Cuban friends. We are having maneuvers over the river at the lower coast of Algiers. This is west of New Orleans, downriver and rural. His next statement was, "What do you think about President Kennedy?" I was dumbfounded by the question. I said, "I don't know. I really don't have an opinion." He said, "We think we should kill the son of a bitch, and then we should go down to Cuba and blast that bastard Castro out of the Gulf of Mexico." The Hispanics just stood there like maybe they didn't understand English, or they were waiting for my reply. I left, not thinking too much more about it. In late October, November 1963, the office of the station was filthy, containing half-filled plates of old food and trash all over the floor. Dave's employees were borrowing plenty of inventory from my station and not returning it. When I questioned this, I was told that Dave was not around much. He's not there to place orders when salesmen come to call. But on November the 22nd, 1963, I needed motor oil. Dave was listed on my books as owing me a case. I was upset about the borrowing, so I went to his station to talk to Dave about what had become a problem for me. I was told by the employees that they were out of oil. I asked, "Well, where can I get in touch with Dave?" The reply was, "You can't. He's flying chickens in Mexico today." The fuck? Huh. Notes: 1957 to 1962, David Ferry changed his residence 5 times. February 22nd, 1967, while the New Orleans District Attorney, Jim Garrison, was conducting a grand jury investigation into Kennedy's death, David Ferry was found dead before he was called to testify. Yeah. Okay. So apparently that was from another station owner, gas station owner, that did a little business with Dave Ferry, who could put him in the company of Clay Shaw. Interesting. Next up, and if you know me, you know I love a good Turkish bath story involving Clay Shaw. Oh my, oh my. So, this is an interview done by Robert E. Lee, Assistant District Attorney of New Orleans Parish. And I don't know the man's name that he is investigating, but this man had bought Captain Morello's gym at 517 Canal Street on the 4th floor. I believe it was the last of 1959 or the first of 1960. I converted it into a Turkish bath with steam room and resting rooms, steam cabinets, and massage facilities. Among my customers that came up was a gentleman that used the name of Clay Bertrand. On occasions, he would come up there with a younger fellow that he called Lee. A few times, also with them, were 2 fellows. All I can describe them by was that they were dark and spoke Spanish along with English. Question: this man that came in by the name of Clay Bertrand, can you describe him physically? He was a large gentleman. His hair was short, very refined, very pleasant, and courteous. Just a complete nice guy. How tall would you say he was? Rather tall. Taller than you? Yes. He was pretty heavy. When you saw him in the company of this man called Lee, in relation to Clay Bertrand, what size was Lee? Lee. The reason I noticed him was because he was a loudmouth and what I determined a beatnik. He was a young fellow, small, slender. The only reasons I really noticed his character was that he was always popping off about something being done wrong. Can you elaborate on that? whatever present crisis that the United States would be in at the present time, whatever viewpoint the government was taking is, Lee found fault with it in what I would call a fanatical way. Whenever I would hear him laugh, or whenever I would hear him, I would laugh. Just assume he was another nut. Would you say Lee and the Latins and Bertrand were in the same company frequently or infrequently? Well, infrequently, I guess. Less than twice, you would say? I would say very few times. I would say not over 5 times. With the same Latin types? I don't know. They were the same ones each time, but they were Latins. Yes. How do you know that this man's name is Clay Bertrand? Well, when the people come in, we have to put down a name for records, tax purposes, and our records for who it is, how much they paid. So we would ask them their names, and they would give us their names, and we would write them down. When he first came in, he gave you this name, and you wrote it down. Yes. Did he ever write it down? Well, if he did, it would be on the back of the envelopes which he put their valuables in. We would have them write their names across the back of the envelope. How long would Bertrand and Lee and their group stay in there? Do you have any way of telling the amount of time? Well, except for a few customers that would stay there the whole evening, I would say the average time for most people would be a couple of hours. That's just a basic average, though. A lot of people would use the place for business purposes, use the lounge or, one of the rooms. Would Bertrand and Lee and the Latin types leave together? Yes, they would come in as a group and they would leave as a group. The Latins never appeared there without being in the company of Bertrand. Not to the best of my knowledge, no. Did you ever have Latins there before? Nope, they are the only ones. Was this club expensive? No, but there was a fee. Yes, I believe we charged $3 for a massage. I believe first charge for the bass was $1.50. We went up on the prices a little, but it was never real expensive. Do you know Clay Bertrand by any other name? Sorry. Well, when all this came up in the newspapers and everything, I thought I recognized the man, but I didn't pay it all that much attention the first time. And then as it kept on in the papers and there were pictures, I recognized him as the man who used to come in the club. It took a little thought. If it hadn't been for the characters that he came with up there on those occasions, I probably wouldn't have remembered the man. But I had thought it was an oddball group, especially to be with somebody like him who seemed to be like such an educated and nice man. I realized that that was the man that used the name Clay Shaw, or Clay Bertrand, sorry. Who is this man you're talking about? Clay Shaw. Have you ever seen Clay Shaw on TV? I think I have, but I wouldn't swear to it. I believe one afternoon while they were showing the news, come to think of it, it was when they interrupted a program to show a picture of them coming out of the courthouse. I believe that's when I saw him on TV. I couldn't swear to that, but I remember that they were constantly interrupting programs that I wanted to see to show pictures of these people coming out of the courthouses. Prior to your association with the Canal Street Bass, what was your line of work? Well, I was a physical therapist in California. My last place, I had been 9 years at the El Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs. Did you have occasion to work with some of the better-known people there? Oh, yes. I had clients. William Holden, Clark Gable, Kay Clark's wife, and so many others. Patty Page and her husband. I'm sure they remember you. Oh, yes. They thought I was one of the most independent people they ever knew. What time did you get to work at the Canal Street Bass? Well, most of the time I was there, in a manner of speaking, 24/7 because I would sleep right there in one of the resting rooms. Were you open 7 days a week? Yes. Facilities were available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Yes. Any particular times of day that Clay, Bertrand, and the Latin types and Lee would appear? Would they always appear at certain times? It would always be in the evening. When you say evening, early evening? Well, what I call early, it would be between the hours of 7 and 11 p.m. Did Clay come up there before he came with the group? Sometimes with somebody, sometimes by himself. Most of the time, it was by himself. Most of the time, Clay Bertrand came by himself. Yes. Is there any way you can tell how soon after you assumed the management of the Canal Street Bass that you first saw Bertrand with Lee and the Latins? It would be a long time. Several years? A couple of years, anyhow. I would be able to place it better when I sold out completely. At first, I sold a part interest, a quarter, and then when I went into business in Slidell, I sold him half interest. Canal Street Bass is the business you're talking about. Yes. I don't know the time I sold it out to him entirely. How would you describe the way Lee was dressed? I would say casual clothes, slacks, t-shirt. Did you ever see Lee with a beard? I would say yes, for the simple reason that that's what brought it to mind, that he reminded me of these characters in the French Quarter with these little cute goatees. Signed, Fred Hendrick Lehmans Jr., masseuse masseur to the stars. Bitches. Good Lord, I just imagine one of these Turkish baths with several locked doors and lots of old dudes walking around butt ass naked in towels and flip flops and having business meetings while they beat each other off or whatever was going on in these places. If they're open 24/7, yeah, I'm sure there's all kinds of Greek unorthodox sex going on in these places. Oh my God. Oh my God. Like totally. All right. Next up, we have the statement from Clyde Johnson, who was a gubernatorial candidate in 1963 for the state of Louisiana. So this guy was running for governor. I met a man in a hotel as Mr. Alton Bernard. I met him and we went into the Blue Room. He said he'd seen me on TV several times and he liked my spirit and encouraged me to go ahead and keep fighting and making speeches against Kennedy. We talked about the Cuban crisis and he said Kennedy was wrong there. First of all, he said the invasion should have never taken place. Then he encouraged me to work and talk about the air support that Kennedy failed to give. He also talked about the interracial matter. That was one of the main things I was working on. He said the pressure was on him and keep public opinion against him. Then, before we got up to leave, he gave me a brown envelope with $2,000 in it in $100 bills, which he said was for me to use in the campaign. Then I went upstairs, and my wife was already upstairs. Then we came down, and a time after, the car was delivered. Subsequently, about the first part of September 63, I received a phone call from Alton Bernard, and he instructed me to meet him at the Capitol House Hotel in Baton Rouge. I went to Baton Rouge and had a suite in the Capitol House. Sometime after I had gone to my room, I received a phone call, and he, Alton Bernard, was on the line in the lobby, and I told him to come up. In 4 or 5 minutes, he was in my room. He had another party with him, whom he introduced to me as Leon. Alton Bernard talked to me about 10 minutes and said someone else was coming up, that he had asked to meet him there in my room. After we talked for about 10 minutes, there was a knock on the door, and this other party was introduced to me as Jack Only. At the time Alton Bernard first entered, he was accompanied by a tall, big, Mexican-looking fellow with a mustache, to whom I wasn't introduced, but who remained at the door. After Jack entered, then we have another conversation, which included Leon, Jack, and Alton Bernard, who were talking among themselves. I left the room to go into the bathroom in the other room, and while in there, I overheard a conversation among the three men. One of them said, to the effect that he would get him. I heard Alton Bernard say there were some others working on this, and I thought they were talking about me, so I went and got my pistol out of my briefcase, and a thought flashed through my mind to either go out the door and get to a telephone, when I heard one say, well, he's got to come down from Washington. The pressure's on. He's got to come back. So I knew they weren't talking about me, and then I put the gun in my pocket, and I went back in and sat down. When I came back into the room, Jack said, what about him? And pointed towards me. Alton Bernard said, that's all right. He's one of my boys. When I came back from the bathroom and after the conversation, Alton Bernard had a briefcase, and when he opened it up, he gave Jack a brown envelope, which was thick. He also handed a brown envelope to Leon, which was not as thick. About the time they were ready to depart, he, Alton Bernard, gave me a brown envelope, which contained 50 $100 bills. After the meeting in Baton Rouge, he called me several times. I was in the Bentley house in Alexandria when I received several calls from Alton Bernard. On March 30th, 1966, at 6:30 p.m., I was shown a group of photographs totaling 35 in number, at which time I picked out 3 photographs of the people who I've identified as Alton Bernard, Leon, and Jack. The person who I have identified as Jack was 165 to 170 pounds, approximately 5'8", dark hair, which was thinning and with a receding hairline. Sounds like Jack Ruby. The person I identified as Alton Bernard was well dressed with a shirt, tie, and suit, and over 6 feet tall, heavy, possibly over 200 pounds, high cheekbones, very articulate, well-spoken, gray hair. Clay Shaw. Lee Oswald person, he says it's cut off at the top, but it says his hairline was receding a bit, and he had a hatchet-like face and wore casual clothing. Now, I don't know what a hatchet-like face is, but okay. I guess thin and pointy. The person who was introduced to me as Jack, I subsequently identified, and one I selected out of 35 photographs as the same person who I know to be Jack Ruby. The person who was introduced as Leon, whose photograph I selected out of the 35 photographs, I know him now to be Lee Harvey Oswald. And the person who introduced himself to me as Alton Bernard, and whom I had met on 2 occasions, and from whom I had received a total amount of $7,000, and whom I selected from the 35 photographs, I now identify as Clay Shaw. The reason I have not come forward prior to this time is that I have known that Oswald was arrested and subsequently shot by Jack Ruby, and that Jack Ruby was tried and convicted and subsequently died. It was only after I had seen Clay Shaw's pictures in the paper and on TV that I associated Ruby, Oswald, and Shaw as being the persons in my room in Baton Rouge. I have been scared, and I also felt that the law has been taking its natural course when they apprehended Oswald and Ruby, and it was only at that time that I associated Clay Shaw as being the other person that the full impact of the events that occurred in my room struck me. I have received no promises whatsoever, and I am not looking for any. And although I am not a pro-Kennedy man, in my way, I referred back to the Bible, which states, know the truth, and it shall make you free. And I am making this statement in the cause of justice. Signed, Clyde Johnson, witnessed by James Alcock. So, there's a former businessman, former gubernatorial governor candidate of the state of Louisiana, being approached and befriended on several occasions by a man who he identified as Clay Shaw using the name Alton Bernard in the company of Jack Ruby and Oswald. I have no idea what to think about that. Then, just as the shite was hitting the fan in 1967, early March 2nd, 1967, the FBI caught wind that Jim Garrison was going to go after Clay Shaw. And there's an interesting blurb. Of course, they're trying to figure out as much as they can about this individual, Clay Shaw, aka Clay Bertrand. And this is what it says. A check of our files disclosed that we received allegations as early as 1954 that Shaw was a homosexual. HO 1218C advised on March 1964 that he has had relations of a homosexual nature with Clay Shaw. The informant described Shaw as a brilliant, powerful man given to sadism and masochism in his homosexual activities. On February the 24th, 1967, we received information from Aaron Cohn, Managing Director of the Metropolitan Crime Commission, New Orleans, and from NO 1309C that information available to them led them to believe that Shaw does in fact have homosexual tendencies. On February the 24th, 1967, we received information from Aaron Cohn and from the New Orleans informant 1309C that Clay Shaw is identical with an individual by the name of Clay Bertrand, who allegedly was in contact with Dean Andrews, New Orleans attorney in connection with Lee Harvey Oswald, the facts of which are follows. Wow. So there it is in an FBI memorandum, folks, that on February 24th, 1967, we received information from Aaron Cohn and an informant that Clay Shaw is identical with an individual by the name of Clay Bertrand. It doesn't get any clearer than that. And there are notes all over these papers. Page 1 confirms Andrews' info correct. Page 2, FBI interprets Andrews as dreaming it all up. Yeah, that part. That part. Another FBI memorandum to the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, from the Director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. We have previously furnished you information we have received concerning the investigation being conducted by New Orleans District Attorney James Garrison concerning the assassination of the late President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and particularly information pertaining to Mr. Clay Shaw, 54 years old, who has been arrested by Mr. Garrison. News media have reported that Mr. Garrison has said Clay Bertrand is the alias used by Mr. Clay Shaw. The name Clay Bertrand was introduced into the assassination investigation by Mr. Dean Andrews Jr. There is attached a copy of a memorandum which sets forth information in our files concerning Dean Andrews and the investigation to identify and locate Clay Bertrand. It is also noted Andrews described Clay Bertrand as a 22 to 23-year-old young man, which kind of falls in line with the bouncer of the show bar, Clay Bertrand. This information is also being furnished to the Honorable Marvin Watson, a special assistant to the President and to the Director of the Secret Service. Boom. Correlation summary. Whew, this is a big one. This looks to me like a CIA file. Classified. Secret. Subject, Clay Laverne Shaw. All logical variations of subject's name and aliases were searched, and identical references were found as Clay Laverne Shaw. Alton Bernard was his pen name. Clay Bertrand, Clem Bertrand, Clay Shaw, Clay L. Shaw, Clay R. Shaw, LaBarnia Shaw, Alan White, another pen name, and Clay W. Shaw, also searched as Gene Davis. See page 21 of our summary. This is a summary of information obtained from a review of all C references to the subject and bureau files under the names and aliases listed above. This summary has been prepared for use at the seat of government and is not suitable for dissemination. It is designed to furnish a synopsis of the information set out in each reference. In many cases, the original serial will contain the information in more detail. Analyst Louise Morel, Coordinator Josephine Tulare, approved by Lawrence Brady. Classified by multiple sources. You think? All right, let's see here. What is this? Mrs. Jeff Josephine. Mrs. Josephine Jeff. I don't know. This woman, represented by attorney James Gilpy, appeared before the New Orleans grand jury on March the 9th. She was Shaw's secretary at the International Trade Mart for a number of years and apparently was quizzed by Garrison about Shaw's activities. She was again questioned on April the 4th. Andrews contacted the New Orleans FBI office on April 6th to seek information in bureau and DJ files about certain persons named in the investigation. He stated that he expected Mrs. Hugg to testify that Andrews had visited Shaw's office a number of times and picked up envelopes containing money there. Where have we heard about Shaw handing out these brown envelopes of money? Money. Shaw's secretary also stated that David Ferry was seen in his office numerous occasions. Last but certainly not least, my favorite, Echo from New Orleans, comes from former FBI New Orleans field office secretary William Walter, interviewed by the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Here we go. Your question of whether or not I have any knowledge concerning Lee Harvey Oswald's being an informant, or what knowledge I have of Lee Oswald before the assassination, is that I was on duty Saturday morning in November or October when Oswald requested to be interviewed by an FBI agent. Could you be speaking of August 1963? Walter says yes. Sometime before the assassination, he had been arrested by the New Orleans Police Department during I believe it was a picketing of a Fair Play for Cuba committee, something. He was involved in the Fair Play for Cuba committee. He requested an agent to interview him at the police department. Yes, and Agent Quigley handed me a memorandum with Lee Harvey Oswald's name on it and asked me to check the indexes and determine whether or not there was any file or files on that named individual in the New Orleans office. I recall searching the indexes and finding a card that showed more than one file number, which would indicate we had more than one case. Not necessarily meaning that the cases were on active investigation, but that sometime during the New Orleans office inquiry into Oswald, there were cases that his name appeared in other than one file. When I searched for these files in the normal filing area of the Bureau, which was in an open bay filing, the files were not there. From looking at the numbers, they fell in the category, looking at the file numbers, they fell in the category of security type, informant type files, 105 classifications, 134 classifications. I gave the memorandum with the notation of the file numbers we had in our indexes back to Quigley, and that is the last I heard, or the last time I was interested in seeing any information about Oswald until after the assassination. It was after the assassination that I was curious, and went back to look to see what the files would indicate that had been done by the New Orleans office to Oswald. Curious as to whether or not our office had an ongoing investigation before the assassination. What I found was a file in the special agent in charge's safe, or his locked file cabinet, and I don't recall its file number, but I recall on the jacket of the file a special agent Warren DeBreeze's name. I want to make one point that I only found one file, even though, as I recall, there were more files listed that our office had that had Oswald's name referenced in them. I need also to make a distinction that just because an individual would have his name in the indexes and a file number would not necessarily mean that the individual was subject on that file. He could have just been interviewed and an interview sheet put in the file. In that case, the page number will be listed next to the file number to show the serial that the individual had in that file. In Oswald's case, it showed that there was more than one file number assigned to him. Would it be fair to say that these indexes, which indicated these file numbers, would not indicate whether the files were active or pending, but that there were, in fact, files on Oswald for these particular categories, either in the past or in the present? Mr. Walters says that is correct. The indexes only showed what files were in the New Orleans office, not whether or not they were active or closed. With reference to the file on which Special Agent DeBreeze's name appeared, could you at this time identify that file as being a security informant file as opposed to some other type of file? Walter: I can't recall what file jacket I looked at. It was either a 104 or a 130, or a 105 or a 134. I really don't know. I could not in 1968 when I was asked, could not remember then either. Do you know of any FBI employees who developed Oswald as an informant or a confidential source of information? Walter: I don't have any first-hand knowledge other than what I saw on the jacket, the name that I saw on the jacket of the file. I know employees of the FBI that should have that knowledge of Oswald being involved either as an informant or a security investigation, and these were agents that were in the position and assigned to these categories within the New Orleans jurisdiction. Can you name anyone who would substantiate the allegation that Oswald was an FBI informant? Walter: I don't know of anyone that would, but I can give you the names of some that should. Ernest Wall, Milton Cock, Warren DeBreeze. That is all that comes to my mind. Mr. Walter, I would like to ask you questions concerning a teletype which you allegedly received at the FBI field office in New Orleans on November the 17th, 1963. Did you receive such a communication from FBI headquarters on this date? Walter: I received a teletype at the during the early morning hours on November 1763. It was a conference teletype that referred to a possible attempt on President Kennedy during his up-and-coming trip to Dallas. So, there you have it. William Walter. Warren DeBreeze's name likely on Oswald's informant file, his 134 file in the New Orleans office, and not his security file. I believe we know what Warren DeBreeze was up to in New Orleans. He was running informants and chasing down information, people like Horace Pena, Lee Oswald, various others, I'm sure. And if there was a file in the New Orleans office concerning Lee Oswald, it was likely, the one that had Warren DeBreeze's name on it, it was likely an informant file. But it's not out of the realm of possibility that he would have had a security file as well, given his background. But again, what side of the fence is everybody walking on here? Sure, the Bureau would want to cover their ass. That's a given. That's a no-brainer. I mean, you can't have the alleged assassin of the president. You can't have that be tied back to your organization in any way, whether it's the FBI, the CIA, or anything like that. Those files would have been deep six quicker than shit. But anyway, that's it for some Echoes of New Orleans. Thank you so much for joining the show again and listening to the end. Follow me on Twitter at TheLoneGunman7, and make sure you subscribe on YouTube if that is how you consume this show. I would greatly appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. Stay warm. Be safe. Until next time, folks. Peace.